Welcome to the session of MS21 on social processes and behavioral issues. We are studying about different organizational communication process, and in this session, we'd like to deal about a couple of very important things. One is about how managers can manage effectively on one-on-one communication and how managers can manage effective organization-wide communications. Because when it comes to improve communication, managers normally face these two important tasks. So therefore, first let's start about how to manage one-to-one communication. When I'm referring to the managers, on an average, if you'll see in any industry, the first line managers, normally they used to spend close to 57% of their time with people. While if we'll graduate from the frontline managers to the middle and the high level managers, for example, the mid level managers, they spend close to 63% of their time with people, directly with people. And top managers spends highest amount of time with people, around 78% of the time. So if you see these percentages, the numbers makes it very, very clear that managers spend actually a great deal of time with the people, and more predominantly they are into a one-to-one communication with others. So let's try to understand how to manage such one-to-one communication. One of the method is called choosing the right communication medium, because sometimes the messages are so poorly communicated because they are just delivering using the wrong communication medium, which is actually the method to deliver a message. For example, say the wrong communication medium is being used when an employee returns from lunch, picks up the note, for example, on our office chair and leans down for a while. She's been fired. The wrong communication is also being used when, say, in organization, when an employee just pops into your office every 10 minutes with a simple request. So there are two general kinds of communication media which we discussed in our earlier class. One is about the oral and written communication, wherein in oral communication we spoke about that includes the face-to-face interactions and group meetings through telephone calls, video conferencing, and any other means of sending and receiving the spoken message. So studies have shown that managers generally prefer the oral communication over written, because it is providing the opportunity to ask questions about peers of the message that they do not understand. Oral communication is also a very rich communication medium, as it allows the managers to receive and assess the non-verbal communication, which is accompanying also with the spoken messages. And spoken messages in the form of, that is the body language, the facial expressions, the voice characteristics, which is associated with the paralanguage. Furthermore, we do not need a personal computer and an internet connection to conduct an oral communication. It is just as simple as it is. You can schedule an appointment, track someone down in your hall, or catch someone over the phone itself. So therefore, that is called as the oral communication. Whereas in case of written communication, it is like you can include the letters, emails, and memos. Almost most managers prefer liking and using the oral communication, whereas email in particular is changing how they communicate with workers, customers, and each other. Nowadays, in pandemic, email and video conferencing in the oral mode and email in the written mode is the fastest growing form of communication, primarily because of its convenience and because of its speed. For example, people read 6 times faster than they can listen. They usually can read 30 email messages in 10 to 15 minutes. By contrast, dealing with voice messages, actually can take a considerable amount of time. So written communication such as email is well suited actually for delivering straightforward messages and informations. Furthermore, an email accessible at the office, at home, and on the road. Actually, managers can use email to stay in touch from anywhere at almost any point of time. And email and other written communication actually need not have to be sent and received simultaneously. Messages can be sent and stored for reading at any point of time. So therefore, managers can send and receive many more messages using email than by using any oral communication, which requires people to get together in person or by phone or through video conferencing. But however, email has its own drawbacks. One is that it lacks the formality of paper memos and letters. It is easy to fire off a rushed email that is not written well or been thought through. So another drawback to the email is that it lacks the non-verbal cues, making the emails very easy to misinterpret. Although written communication, whatever it will be, it is well suited actually to deliver the straightforward and informations, but however it is not so well suited when the information is supposed to be complex, ambiguous, when the information is more emotionally laden, which are actually being better delivered through an oral communication. I think when you speak about the written and oral communication, we need to talk about another important facet of communication that is called as listening. The question arises is, are you and me a good listener? In fact, most people, including managers, are terrible listeners, retaining only about 25% of what they basically hear. We qualify as a poor listener if when somebody is speaking, if we are frequently interrupting them, or we jump to a conclusion about what people will say before they have said, or we hurry the speaker to finish his or her point as a passive listener sometimes. So therefore question is, how important is it is to be a good listener? In general, about say 45% of the total time we spend communicating with others is spent on listening. Furthermore, listening is very important for the managerial and business success, even for the one who are at the top of an organization. Listening actually is a very important skill for managers than ever. Since if you'll see the oldest generation like Gen X employees tend to expect a high level of interaction with their supervisors. They want feedback on their performance, but they also want to offer feedback and know that it is heard, Gen X and the millennial generations. In fact, actually managers with the better listening skills actually are rated more highly by their employees and are much more likely to be promoted. So now, what can we do to improve the listening ability, right? Number one, first of all, we need to understand the difference between hearing and listening. If you refer the Webster's dictionary, it says, hearing mean it is like an act or process of perceiving the sound. But whereas when you're listening, it says we are making a very conscious effort to hear. That means, in other words, we are reacting to sounds such as bottle breaking or music being played too loud, because hearing is an involuntary, physiological process. By contrast, if we see learning is a voluntary behavior. So if we want to become a good listener, we need to choose to be a good listener. Typically, that means, we need to choose to be an active, empathetic, and soulful listener. So here, when I'm uttering the word called as an active listening. So active listener, what it mean active listening? Active listening mean assuming that half the responsibility for successful communication, by actively giving the speaker the non-judgmental feedback that shows how we have accurately heard what the speaker has said. So active listeners makes it very clear from their behavior that they are listening carefully to what the speaker is saying. So several specific strategies can help us to become a better listener. Number one, we need to clarify the response by asking the speaker to explain the confusing or the ambiguous statements. Second, when there are natural breaks in the speaker's delivery, it is appropriate to use the time to paraphrase or summarize what has been said. What I said about paraphrasing means restating what the speaker has said. Summarizing means reviewing the speaker's main points or emotions. So paraphrasing and summarizing gives the speaker the chance to correct the message if the active listener has attached the wrong meaning to it. So active listeners also, avoid being evaluative or being critical until the message is complete. So they recognize that their only responsibility during the transmission of a message is to receive it accurately and derive the intended meaning out of it. This is one about active listening. The second one talks about the empathetic listening. Empathetic listening means understanding the speaker's perspective and personal frame of reference, and then giving the feedback which is conveying the understanding to the speaker. Empathetic listening, when you're referring, it goes beyond the active listening because it depends on our ability to set aside our own attitudes or relationships to be able to see and understand things through someone else's eye. So empathetic listening is just as important as active listening, especially for managers, because it helps in building rapport and trust with others. The key to being a more empathetic listener is to show the desire to understand and to reflect the people's feeling. We can show our desire to understand by listening, that is asking people to talk about what is important to them, and then it is just and then by giving them sufficient time to talk before responding or interrupting. So this kind of reflective feeling is a very important part of empathetic listening, because when we go for a reflective feeling, it demonstrates how we understand the speaker's emotions. So unlike active listening, in which we restate or summarize the informational content, what has been said, the focus over here in empathetic listening or having a reflective feeling is on the effective part of the message. So this is very important. So this is one. The third one, I think we spoke about the listening. In the listening, we spoke about the active listening and empathetic listening, wherein reflective listening also I brought in. Third one and most important one talks about giving the feedback. To start, managers need to recognize that feedback can be constructive or destructive. So if we talk about the destructive feedback is like disapproving without any intention of being helpful, and almost always cause a negative or a defensive reaction in the recipient itself. If you'll see the reverse of it, the constructive feedback. Constructive feedback is intended to be helpful, corrective, and it is encouraging because it aids at correcting the performance deficiency of the people who are working and motivating them up properly. So therefore, for feedback to be constructive rather than destructive, it must be immediate. The feedback need to be focused on specific behavior, need to be problem oriented. The immediate feedback actually is much more effective than delayed feedback, because managers and workers can recall the mistake or incident more accurately and can discuss much in detail. For example, say if a worker is rude to a customer and the customer is immediately reporting the incident to the management, and if the manager is in turn immediately discusses the incident with the employee, there should be little disagreement over what was being said or done. By contrast, it is unlikely that either the manager or the worker will be able to actually accurately remember the specifics of what has actually occurred. The manager waits several weeks to discuss the incident. When that happens, it may be too late to have a very meaningful conversation. Another point we need to introspect is about specific feedback, because specific feedback focuses on particular acts or incidents that are clearly under the control of the employee. For instance, instead of telling an employee that he or she is always late for the work, it is much more constructive to say that in the last, say, 3 weeks, you have been 30 minutes late on, say, 4 or 5 occasions and more than an hour late on a couple of more occasions. Furthermore, specific feedback is not very helpful unless the employees have control over the problem that the feedback addresses. Last, the problem-oriented feedback. The problem-oriented feedback focuses on the problems or incidents associated with the poor performance than on the worker or the worker's personality. Giving feedback does not give managers the right to personally attack the workers. Although managers may be frustrated by a worker's poor performance, the point of problem-oriented feedback is to draw attention to the problem in a non-judgmental way so that the employee has enough information to correct it. So this is about the point that we discussed in terms of how to manage one-to-one communication. Now, though managing one-to-one communication is important, manager must also know how to communicate effectively with a large number of people throughout an organization. Therefore, learners, we are presenting how managers can manage, affect the organization-wide communication. So it is like a couple of things. One is improving the transmission, getting the message out. So here you may see that there are several methods of communication like email, collaborations, discussions, speeches, conferences, broadcasting through voice email. These are all the means which makes it very easier for managers to communicate with people throughout the organization and get the message out. Although we normally think of email, the transmission of message via computer as a means of one-to-one communication plays an important role in organization-wide communication. So collaborative websites, I think this is also a very important means of electronically promoting organization-wide communication. I think online discussion forums, using the web or software-based discussion tools to allow the employees across the company to easily ask questions and share the knowledge with each other. The point over here in what I'm referring to about the online discussion is to share expertise and not just duplicate solutions that is already been discovered by others in the company. Similarly, because of the collaborative discussion, the site gets or remains online, which can actually provide a historical database for the people who are dealing with particular problem for the first time. So collaborative discussion sites actually are typically, organized by topics or by person or by project, and that can also be shaped up in the form of blogs, which will allow the readers to post comments, kind of things. So this is all about, an online discussion. Collaborative discussion sites in the internet actually is one of the viable medium, because managers and workers can collaborate on several problem solving. Finally, reward or information sharing by making the online sharing of knowledge a key part of performance rating is also being needed. There is another means of electronic transmissions is about electronic communication is about televised or videotaped speeches and meetings. I think televised and videos taped speeches and meetings are something as simply speeches and meetings originally made to a small audience that are either simultaneously broadcast to other locations in the company or videotaped for subsequent distribution and viewing by a broader audience. The voice messaging or voice mail is also a important thing, and it is been seen that most people who are unfamiliar with the ability to broadcast voice mail, they use by sending a recorded message to everyone in the company, and the broadcast voice mail actually gives the top managers a very quick, convenient way to address their work forces via oral communication. Now, there is another point we need to also think about it is how to improve the reception, hearing what others feel and think. When people are thinking of organization-wide communication, they think of the CEO and top managers getting their message out to people in the company. But organization-wide communication also mean finding way to hear that what people throughout the organizations are actually been thinking and feeling, because this is very important, because most employees and managers are reluctant to share their thoughts and feelings with the top managers. One of the survey that indicates that around 30% of first level managers feels that their companies encourage employees to express their opinions actually openly, whereas another research study of close to 22 companies, they have found that 70% of the people who got surveyed were afraid to speak up about the problems they know that existed. Therefore, learners withholding the information about organizational problem or issues is called as organizational silence. Organizational silence occurs when employees believe that telling management about problems won't make a difference, or that they'll be punished, for example, or being hurt in some way for sharing the informations. Therefore, to overcome that one, I think many companies, they used to have company hotlines, they used to take periodic survey feedback, make frequent informal meeting, do surprise visits and blogs are some of the additional ways wherein the organizational silence can be overcome. For example, when I'm referring about company hotline, there are like phone numbers that anyone in the company can call, anonymously to leave information for upper management. Company hotlines are incredibly being used as, most of them, they have been resulted into investigation in some form of corrective actions within the organization. Survey feedback is also a way out wherein the information is collected by survey from organizational members that gets compiled, disseminated, and used to develop action plans for improvement. Many organizations, you may see, they are using this survey feedback and they periodically survey their managers and employees several times in a year. Frequent informal meeting between the top level managers and the lower level managements are one of the best way for top managers to hear what others think and feel. Many people assume that top managers are at the center of everything that goes on in an organization, but top managers commonly actually feel isolated from most of their lower level employees and people. So consequently, more and more top managers are scheduling nowadays in companies. You may see that they are scheduling frequent informal meeting with people throughout their companies. So this is one of the way. Another means is the blogs, which I was mentioning earlier. Blogs is also a possible way to hear what people are thinking and saying, both inside and outside the organization. Because as a blog is a personal website that provides personal opinions, recommendations, news summaries, and readers' comment. For example, at Google, if you'll see, They own the blog hosting service bloggers. Hundreds of employees, they are actually writing internal blogs. One employee, as I was reading a textbook, one employee has even wrote a blog that posted all the notes from the brainstorming session used to redesign the search page used by millions each day. So this is what the beauty of the blogs. External blogs also used to be there. Twitters, microblogs. These are called as the microblogs entries that are, limited with few characters, few words, few characters you can only insert. I think my Twitter accepts only 140 characters, which is written by people outside the company, which is also a very good way to find out what others are saying or thinking about your organization or your product or your action plans. But keeping up with this communication media actually requires someone in the firm to actively monitor what is being said on web, blog, and Twitter sites. So this is also a important means of it, wherein we can do the kind of communications. So this is what I thought of bringing it to you in terms of the communication process, organizational communication process, and particularly on understanding how managers used to manage effectively in one-to-one communication and how managers can manage effective organization-wide communications. Thank you so much, friends.